Yeah, hello. My name is Keith Duncan. I'm the artist of this exhibition, and the medium that I work in is acrylic paint on fabric mounted onto canvas. I want to start off by saying that I'm a visual storyteller. I see myself talking about my Southern experience, my life experience. I was born in New Orleans, raised in the Deep South. And most of my images are the body of works that I work on is about my culture. And I attended LSU, Louisiana State University. And during my years at LSU, I would go over to Southern University, which is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. LSU and Southern universities are both in Baton Rouge, and we would go over to Southern University, my classmates and I, and we would go, especially during the homecoming weekend. And so this was my first introduction to the Battle of the Bands. You know, it's of course it's a football game that we would go to attend, but we wasn't interested in the football game. We wanted to see the marching bands go at each other and perform. It was always a competition between, the battle of the bands. So the battle of the bands was something that I was always interested in, and so years later I was able to work on this body of work. One thing about New Orleans, growing up in New Orleans, you are accustomed to music. It's the birthplace of jazz and second line. And there's a lot of history in that. And the kids down in New Orleans, some of them are introduced to music at a very young age. They join a marching band. There's some middle schools, ages from, I would say the grade levels from 4th grade to 5th grade, 6th grade. They're already starting to join a marching band. And so it goes into high school and then eventually the college level. So it's very steep and rooted in the culture down in New Orleans. And that was always something that I was interested in. Painting about where I was from, where I grew up, and music is again a big part of my culture. And being a visual artist, I thought it was important to tell that story. The material that I work with, I was always interested in painting in a non-conventional way, or presenting my work in a very non-traditional way. So I see these as paintings, but I see them also as banners, and relating banners to the football. One thing about the HBCU Marching Band Series, it relates also to sports because they go hand in hand. The band plays when it's football season. And we also say when it's football season in New Orleans, it's also band season, because that's part of the culture. And I always painted on banners and early in my career. I have a funny story. Me and my brother, we were like the only two artists, I would say, in our high school. And so we would be called to the principal office sometimes. They would come on the intercom, Keith Duncan, Carl Duncan, come to the office. So we were like, what did we do? So we would go to the office, and they wanted us to paint the Bears Wildcats. That was my school mascot. It was a big old tiger, wildcat on a banner, a paper. And we would paint this, and later find out that the football team would run through it before they take onto the field to play. So me and my brother would look at each other and go, all right, there goes another piece. That aspect of the banner stayed with me. It always stayed with me throughout my career. You know, I like looking at artists like Kerry James Marshall, Leon Gallup. There was other artists that painted on unstretched canvas flat onto the wall. You know, with grommets into it, to give it that, you know, direct contact with the surface of the wall. And I always like that in my art. You know, how to present my work in a non-conventional way. So in 2010, I started to incorporate fabric into my work. You know, I always painted on canvas, but I started to incorporate fabric because in 2010 I was back in New Orleans. I lived in New York for 15 years, and then I went back home in 2008. There's an artist down in New Orleans, Willie Birch. He's a well-known artist, and he was my mentor. So he curated a show in New York for me to be. It was a solo show that I had at the Q Arts Foundation, and for that show, I wanted to break away from the way I used to paint. Not so much visually, but in the materials I was using. So I started to incorporate fabric. And that's where I was interested in looking at quilt makers from Alabama, the G. Benz quilters, Faith Ringo's quilts of storytelling. You know, those are the artists' works that I was looking at when I started to think about pattern as my backdrop. So when I began this series, I wanted the fabric to be the middle part of the canvas. And as you can see, these lines, these angular lines going to create this sense of a border around the fabric. And definitely keeping in mind the school colors, you know. So that was what I would lay as my backdrop. And then I would incorporate and go online and look at all the different images that you know, gathering of my resource of the different figures and you know, in the band. Yeah. Historically black colleges and universities is very important. You know, right now I think there's a resurgence and the interest of HBCUs. And I thought it was very important to talk about this tradition. It's a heritage. It's a very long tradition of these schools. When I talk to the students about doing this body of work, yes, they get caught up in the figures and the colors and the poses and also the pattern background. But I always want them to pay close attention to the school crest because they could see that Tuskegee University was established in 1881. That to me is history, and that is very important because these schools have been here for a long time. These institutions of higher learning has been a part of the American culture for a long time. You know, they were established and founded during the Civil War era and after the Civil War. So this is not just pretty and beautiful and great to look at, but it's also is a history lesson in each of these paintings. So to me, that's very important. The artists, Kerry James Marshall, Micheline Thomas, Kehinde Wiley, they started to break down the images of Black representation in art, not in a stereotypical, negative, romantic way, but in a more historic, positive way. So I wanted these images of Black representation to show that the Black excellence in African Americans, the strive, the accomplishments that African Americans have gained in this country. So to represent these figures, again, it deals with heritage, it deals with Black excellence, it deals with pride in your community. You know, these figures, they perform on the playing field in front of the crowd. It's as if they're performing in front of the community too, you know, in the Black vernacular community, as if it's their own community, neighborhood, and members of their family that comes and participate and be a part of this. So this is very historical. It's very important, and especially in how African Americans are represented. If I had to describe this body of work in 3 words, movement, definitely Black pride, and historical, very, very historical. In 2022, this was the #1 marching band in the country. It was Bethune-Cookman. So when I was interested in doing this body of work, I went online and I typed in the top 15 HBCU schools. And #1 on that list was Bethune-Cookman out of Florida State. And then from there, I started to do the #2 band. #2 band on that list was Florida A&M, FAMU, as they're called. FAMU has a lot of history when it comes to HBCU Marching Band. There was a Dr. Foster. He was the band director. And he was the first one that had his band members break from their military routine of marching in a straight line in a uniform fashion, and to take their instruments, put it down on the ground, and start dancing. He added dancing choreograph to his routine. And so, of course, that caught on. And so all the other marching bands, HBCU marching bands, started to emulate what they were doing. So FAMU was the first HBCU marching band to start dancing and break away from that military style marching, in a band. Yeah. What I want people to take away from this exhibit, I want them to think about their own schools that they attended. Their high school, the universities that they attended, the college. I want them to have that nostalgic experience of what it was like when they attended school. Because this is so much about pride and tradition and heritage, I had said earlier when we first started to exhibit this work that yes, this is HBCU Marching Band. This is Black excellence, Black pride, and Black tradition. But it's so much more than that. It's not just about Black history, but it's more about American history. And that is important to showcase that.